Come on, get out of there. I'm gonna teach you how to write a novel.
Now, I sit here and talk a lot about how to be creative and make your own projects, but what have I actually done? Quite a bit, as it turns out. I like doing things, and I like doing creative things. And ever since I was a kid, I've been creating stories and characters. This is something that came to me naturally, and I presume that it's similar for you, and that's why you're here. And I have all these things that I like to do. I like drawing pictures, and I like writing songs, and I like writing stories. And I don't know, all of this, I guess it all boils down to I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. And it's taken me a few years to understand, few years, I'm 45, that in order to produce something, in order to publish something, you need to have your eyes on the very next step and not the goal itself. I think it was Akira Kurosawa that explained that when you go mountain hiking, the first thing that they teach you is to keep your eyes on the ground and not the summit. Because if you keep looking at the summit, you're going to get frustrated and discouraged and lose your drive. And that stuck with me because it's helped me understand that writing a novel and life itself sometimes is about the process. It's only ever about the next step. So let's talk about the writing process itself. And I'm going to use one of my in progress novels as an example. Now, this is called Lightbringer, and I've written over 20,000 words for it. Let's talk about what working on it actually looks like and how I got to where I am right now. This is the process, and I swear to you it works. Everybody I know has a novel in them. Everybody I know has a story in them just crying to get out. And people get scared and people are afraid of or blocked from putting it out because they think it's lame, because they don't think it's well thought out, or because they don't believe they actually have a story. They think, oh, I only have a character or a place or a situation, and they don't know what to do with it. What is there that's interesting about all this? And sometimes we get stuck trying to answer the literal very first question. And that is the key to this whole thing, asking a question, then answering that question. So let's start with an exercise. Let's say you have a couple of characters or a setting or the beginnings of dialogue, some phrase that you really want to write around. And you can't call that a story because how could you? There's nothing there yet. You don't know who these characters are or why the setting is important or why this dialogue is happening. But that's where you got to start. So in my case for this novel, I had two characters. I had Rex and I had Saltpeter, and I had a very rough idea of who these characters were and what they looked like. Like Rex was a demon and Saltpeter was a soul that was sent to hell. And that's not a story, but you can see how they can be part of one. And the exercise that I want you to do is you take these two characters, you take your two characters, you put them in a room, and you give them a conflict, a challenge, something to solve, and then just watch the fireworks. And what I mean by this exercise is you can just write the scene, don't worry about being writerly, and what you're going to discover is that your characters come alive and they're going to start either fighting or collaborating or discussing a plan. And you'll discover things about them. You'll start to get to know them. And most importantly, you're going to start having questions about them. Questions like, who is Rex? What did Saltpeter do that made her end up in hell? Where in hell are they? Are they talking on Earth? How did they get from hell to Earth? What sort of rules does this universe follow? Is Rex's voice loud and booming or squeaky and annoying? Does Saltpeter have long dark hair that would sway in the wind as they talk? Is there wind? Are they outside? Does Saltpeter have horns? Does her horns prevent her hair from swaying in the wind? And all these things will inform your story. It's going to teach you who your characters are and what their world looks like. And maybe at some point a third character walks in. Who are they? How they get here? What's so important that they suddenly interrupt this conversation? What's happening? And then the building blocks of your story will start to fall into place. And it doesn't matter if you think these building blocks are lame or if your words are not fancy enough. None of that matters. What matters is that you indulge in this sort of warmth that happens when you create something, when you breathe life into two characters that didn't exist before, that were not there until you came along. I remember when I first started writing a webcomic, and this was back in 2002, and I created these 3 characters, and I started putting them in like funny situations. And viewer, let me tell you, they never went away. Not a day goes by where I don't think about these 3 characters and what they're up to, what they would think about a certain situation, how they grew up, how they grew old. And that's just half the fun. So the first step is exactly that. Grab a couple of characters or one character or a handful of characters, give them a situation, give them a tool, give them a problem to solve, and just watch them come alive. Now, the second exercise is very similar to the one above. It involves a lot of writing. But what I did is I sat down and I outlined the entire novel. It took me about an hour. Except it didn't, because it took me about a year to think about it, just thinking about it while I was walking outside, and then it took me an hour to put it down on paper. But that outline helped me with the exercise that I'm about to share with you. So what I did is I grabbed this notebook here, and Jesus, this one has to be like 5 years old already or something. But I took this notebook, and then I would grab like a piece of that outline, a bullet point out of that outline, and I would write a chapter from it. And it wouldn't be fancy at all. It wouldn't have like special like fancy words or important phrases or anything like that. It was very much as if I was telling this story to a 5-year-old. It was like, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then, you know, you get that weird sort of spark of inspiration where you remember you had to say something before that, and you go back and you retcon it, and it's like, oh, before this, then this other thing happened. And eventually what I ended up was this, it was this whole bunch of, for example, this is like one of the chapters was 3 pages long, and that was it. And there's chapter 3 right here. So you end up with these bones of a story, the good bones of a story, of a completed story that you can just flesh out when you're ready to sit down and write. So the exercise is essentially just that. Just grab a piece of the story and explain it. Just tell it as if you're telling it to somebody that has no context from the story and knows very little about the world. And you're just sort of giving them the basics. And once you have the basics, that's going to help you have the correct questions that you need to ask to flesh out the rest of the story. So yeah, part of the writing is the writing, but also part of the writing is the not writing. And what I mean by that is that a lot of stuff in your notebook is going to be things that are not going to be found in the final notebook. Like for example, with Lightbringer, what is Saltpeter's motivation? What is Rex's plan for the world? If his plan of taking over heaven works, then is that interesting? What happens if that fails? Where does it fail? What is plan B? And these are difficult questions to answer because it needs to be interesting, because your characters have to have a conflict. They have to have something to overcome, a challenge. That's what makes them grow. But it's all work that you're doing while you're not writing, while you're just thinking about it. And it's work that's not going to be in the final novel, definitely not. But for me, it still helps to, write it out. I remember literally writing Rex's plan in his voice just to make sure that, he had a plan to take over heaven and he wasn't just going from one set piece to the next. And this exercise will help inform the critical parts of your novel, like for example the theme. What is the theme of the novel? What is this novel actually talking about? In that same vein, and also very important, you have to think about what is it that your character wants. And when you try to figure out what it is that your character wants, what they're looking for, that's where you're going to find the main conflict of the story. Because your story might aim to teach them a lesson, to teach them that the thing they want is not exactly the thing they need. So what is it that they need? And that's what the story should aim to provide: your character's growth or the consequences of avoiding that growth. So if you think about it, if you think about the biggest franchises out there, you have Luke Skywalker. What does he want? Well, he wants to join the Imperial Academy. That's what he wants. But what does he need? He needs to fulfill his destiny and bring balance to the Force. Or in Lord of the Rings, Aragorn. What does Aragorn want? Well, he wants to mope around the outdoors romancing pretty elves, but what does he need? He needs to step up to his responsibilities as king. Or think about, I don't know, Chief Brody, who wants to close down the beach but needs a bigger boat. Shut up, that's funny. So part of the writing exercise is thinking about and trying to discover what these things are, wants and needs, and what the conflict is, because that is where you'll find what your story is trying to tell you. And as a final exercise, now you've sat down, you're writing by hand, you've written these chapters in a very simplistic sort of way, and this is going to give you places you want to visit within the story, and phrases you want to say, and characters you want to see interact. And then you'll stop for a few days, you'll stop for a few weeks perhaps, and you'll take a walk, and in the back of your mind it's gonna start going, why is this happening in the story? And one of the things that's going to help unblock you from continuing to write and discovering your world is one of the most important questions a writer can ask. And I'm not saying this myself. This is Neil Gaiman who says it, so we're going to listen to him. But this is really a magic bullet when it comes to helping you figure out how to continue discovering that world. Wherever you are in your novel, whoever just spoke, whatever just exploded off to the side, you just have to ask, and then what happened? And you're going to find that as soon as you ask that, your world is going to come alive. Your characters are going to come alive because something's going to happen. A character is going to say something, or somebody else is going to come in, or a meteor will come crashing down as your characters are discussing last season's harvest. And then that's happened, and you ask again, and then what happened? And then you'll have to answer that question, and you'll discover more questions coming at you, and soon you'll find that your story is talking back at you. And that's what's going to make this thing interesting for people to read and for you to write. And that's the process I follow when I'm writing a story. Grab an idea that you have, grab a character you have, grab two characters that you have, put them in a room, give them an object, give them a time and a space, and then ask, and then what happened? What will this character do, and why will that character do this? What motivates them to get out of bed every morning, or what keeps them in it? What is complicating their life? Why do they cry alone at night? And what was that sound coming from the corner of the room? And then what happened? And little by little, you'll end up with all this material that makes up the structure of an actual story, of an actual book that you could just sit down and write the way you want to say it. And that's it. Before you know it, you'll have a full story. And it's just a matter of sitting down and typing it out. And after that, just set aside an hour or 2 hours a day to write as much as you possibly can within that time frame. Sometimes you can only write a sentence, and that's fine. That is the step that you take as you're going up the mountain. And that'll be the progress for that day. And that's okay, because then that line takes you from the point where you were initially to the next point where you can pause and ask, and then what happened? And little by little, I promise you, you're going to have a novel. Just keep your eyes on the ground.